Good morning. Please be seated. We are here in the case of State of Ohio versus Tyler Maynard, case number 20 CR 45. Those of you sitting in the jury box in the rear seats have been summoned as prospective jurors in this case. This time I'll have the state make their introductions.
Good morning. My name is Colleen Williams. I'm here on behalf of Justin Lovett's office. He's the Jackson County prosecuting attorney, and I'm one of his assistants. Seated at me at the table today is Officer Kite with the Jackson Police Department. Good morning, and thank you for coming.
For the defense.
My name is Jim Bolger. I practice in Chillicothe, Ohio, and I represent Tyler Maynard. Good morning.
Thank you. I'm now going to give you your oath as prospective jurors. Will everyone please raise their right hand? Do you swear or affirm that you truly and fully answer all questions put to you by the court or counsel in this case, and this you shall do as you answer under God or under penalty of perjury? If so, say I do.
I do.
Thank you. Your service as a juror is extremely important. Our legal system cannot function without you. Your dedication to our community is greatly appreciated. In a criminal case, the State of Ohio claims that the defendant has committed a crime. In the common pleas court, a defendant is notified of the charge by receiving a document called an indictment. This is a document that contains the allegations involved in the criminal charge. In most criminal cases, the jury is only concerned with whether the crime has been committed. The jury is not involved in sentencing and punishment. The court determines all sentences based upon the Ohio law. The fact that a person is charged with a crime does not mean that he is guilty. By law, the defendant is presumed innocent at all times during a trial. A person is to be found guilty only if that person's guilt is proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The state of Ohio has the obligation to prove each and every element of the alleged crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. The state of Ohio and the defendant are entitled to jurors who approach this case with open minds and agree to keep their minds open until a verdict is reached. Jurors must be as free as humanly possible from bias, prejudice, or sympathy, and not influenced by preconceived ideas either as to the facts or as to the law. You are all undoubtedly qualified to serve as a juror. However, there may be something that could disqualify you in this particular case. At this time, the court and counsel ask you questions. These questions are not designed to pry into your personal affairs, but to discover if you have any knowledge of this case, if you have any preconceived opinion you cannot lay aside, or if you have had any experience that might cause you to identify yourself with either party. These questions are necessary to assure that each party has an impartial jury. Now, if there's a question that I ask or that counsel asks you during this trial that you would rather not answer in front of a room full of individuals, please let me know and we can discuss that with counsel in my office. And let me just go through the seating chart to make sure that everyone's on the same page in that regard. As juror number 1, we have Ms. Queen. Good morning.
Good morning.
Number 2, Ms. Rafferty.
Good morning.
Good morning. Number 3, Ms. Davis. Number 4, we've got Mr. Mannion. And number 5, we have Ms. Wyatt. Number 6, Mr. Brown. Number 7, Ms. Potter. Good morning. Number 8, Mr. Valentine.
Good morning, sir.
Number 9, Mr. Lewis.
Good morning.
Number 10, Mr. Reed. Number 11, Ms. Cruz. And number 12, Mr. Deck. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember there is no right or wrong answer to any of these questions. The right answer is your opinion to the questions that we ask you. I think to be a good juror, you have to have a willingness to be fair and impartial, a willingness to listen, a willingness to follow the law, a willingness to use common sense. Can all of you do that? Right? And can you accept the law as I give it to you? Okay. So you can all set aside any preconceived idea about what you think the law might be in this case and just follow my instructions. All right? Now, the filing of the charge that I've already indicated means nothing because the defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Defendant need prove nothing. Defendant has a constitutional right to remain silent. Can all of you accept those constitutional principles? Okay. I believe in this case, we're going to have the following witnesses. We're going to have Trooper Stephen Dunn. Does anyone know Trooper Dunn? There may be a Peyton Mullins. Does anyone know Peyton Mullins? Now, we're also going to have, obviously, Patrolman Knight. Does anyone know the patrolman? Couple of hands, okay. Well, I'm going to start with an easy warm-up question because I already know the answer. But Ms. Potter, why don't you tell us how you know Patrolman?
My husband, Alan Potter, is the chief of police at the Jackson Police Department.
So you've had a fair amount of connection with the patrolman.
I would say yes.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Do you know anything about this case?
I do not.
Okay.
We do not. That's a rule with the House. We do not discuss, not heard the name.
Counsel,
I
do you
think
wish?
we can short.
Do you want to approach?
I'm sorry, we discussed.
Ms. Potter, given your husband's connection as chief of police, we're going to excuse you and thank you for coming in.
At this time, we would ask Mr. Matchett to seat 7.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Were you able to hear all the questions that I asked so far?
Yes, sir.
Any answers you need to give me?
No.
Okay. I think another witness in this case could be an Angel Gillum. Anyone know Ms. Gillum? Also may be a witness, Carrie Durham. Anyone know Ms. Durham? Also may be a Nicole Hinkle. Does anyone know the defendant? Has anyone had any prior jury service? Has anyone been a victim of crime? Okay, a couple of hands. Okay. Ms. Queen, tell me about how you've been a victim of crime.
Just robbery, things stolen from my home. stuff
Okay.
like that.
Anything about the fact that you had things stolen from your home going to affect how you're going to view this case?
No, I don't. No.
Well, the fact the defendant is here charged with a crime and you've been a victim of crime, do you think you can be fair and impartial?
I would assume so, yeah.
Okay. I saw Mr. Valentine.
Yes, sir.
Uh,
I was robbed at gunpoint in the late 90s in Cincinnati.
Well, that had to be kind of scary.
A little bit.
Yeah. Anything about that experience?
No, sir. I mean, I served 20 years in the military, and I believe in due process.
Okay. I think Mr. Lewis, I saw your hand.
Just a couple hit and runs in the past, that's it.
Okay. That people have hit and run.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. That gonna affect your ability to be fair and impartial? Okay. Is anyone related to anyone who works in law enforcement? Or close personal friends with anyone in law enforcement? Mr. Valentine?
Through my service in the military, I have quite a few friends that were law enforcement officers, DEA agents, stuff like that. But I mean, I don't think that would affect my views of what would be presented in the court.
Okay. I don't expect this trial is going to go beyond Wednesday. We may finish Tuesday, but even if we go to Wednesday, does that create an undue hardship for anyone? Okay. Ms. Yes, there are two. I'll take them in order. Ms. Queen?
Because of my job, I work for the state of Ohio for the DODD. And when I'm here, two of my clients, I'm their only caregiver, so.
Okay. So you work for the Department of Disabilities.
Yes,
So when you're not there, they don't receive care?
No.
So what happens like when you go on vacation? Do they make an arrangement for someone to come in?
usually bring a backup in, but they're very high behavior, so it doesn't happen often. I don't get a vacation very often.
Okay. And then Ms. Cruz, I believe you raised your hand.
Well, we have Apple City computers here in town, and I have a 2.5-year-old toddler that I bring with me to work. And my husband usually goes service calls in different places, and like now he has to take the baby, and he couldn't go to his service call because I'm here, and that's a problem.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have difficulty sitting in judgment of another person? Okay. Now, everyone can speak English. Everyone's been able to hear me speak today. Does anyone have any physical reason that would make it difficult for them to sit? Now, we don't make you sit, for 8 hours at a time. There are breaks, so you do get up and get to move. But we'll have periods where you could be sitting for an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours. Is that a problem for anyone? Okay. Sometimes I've had jurors go, Judge, if you just asked me the right question, I would have raised my hand. So I'll ask, is there any reason that I haven't covered that any one of you believe that you couldn't sit in this case as a fair and impartial juror? Okay. At this time, I will turn questioning over to the state.
Good morning. I do see a few familiar faces from a previous trial. Appreciate everyone coming out today. Just to give you a little bit of more information about myself, my name is Colleen Williams, and I've been either an assistant or an elected prosecutor for the last 25 years. Today, I'm serving as the assistant Jackson County prosecutor and been assigned to this case. I represent Mr. Lovett's office, and I'll be presenting evidence on behalf of the state of Ohio. I'm going to just take a quick opportunity to just give you a little summary of what the charges are, none of the facts behind them, but just some of the information contained in the indictment, so we can talk about whether or not you think you'll have any issues with serving on this jury, because I'm sure all of you are capable. I noticed when asked if everyone could be fair, we got a lot of nods and yeses and things like that, and that's what I would expect. I would hope everyone would be fair. But some cases are more difficult for others to serve on. What might be a good case for one person is not necessarily a good case for others. We all have certain backgrounds that we bring to the table, either as and not necessarily one side or the other, but which you might determine that this isn't the case that you should be sitting on. So I'll just go ahead and give you some information. There are 3 counts alleged. The first one is counts of kidnapping. And it alleges that, and all of these are alleged to have occurred on July the 30th, 2020, that the defendant did by force, threat, or deception remove, in this case it's Nicole Hinkle, from the place where the other person was found, or restrain the liberty of Nicole Hinkle with purpose to terrorize or inflict serious physical harm on Nicole Hinkle. The second count is alleged as one of abduction. Allegations did without privilege to do so, knowingly by force or threat, restrain the liberty of another person, to wit, Nicole Hinkle, under circumstances that created a risk of physical harm to Nicole Hinkle or placing Nicole Hinkle in fear. And finally, improper handling of a firearm in a motor vehicle. Did knowingly transport or have a loaded firearm in a motor vehicle in such a manner that the firearm was accessible to the operator or a passenger without leaving the vehicle. Just based on that information alone, does anyone know right now that they might have some issues hearing this case? Okay, that's good to know. Some of the things that we might what I like to talk to you about. It's a great time now for you all to participate because, you know, just like anywhere else, once we get started, the attorneys will be the ones asking the questions. So now is kind of the one time that you can get an opportunity to speak with me. And one of the things I like to do is not ask everyone the same question. So if Ms. Queen, if I asked you a question and then I go down the line and I ask every single person the same question, what do you think would happen by the time I got done?
A lot of the same answers.
Might get bored.
Yeah.
Take a long time. We could be here for a long time. So do you think you want me to ask everyone the exact same question over and over? Okay. What do you think would help me if I didn't, if you don't want to have to hear me ask everybody the same question?
Choose different questions.
Yeah, that'd be one way. What if it's something important? What I want you to do is maybe raise your hand. Mr. Reed, do you think you could, if I ask something that you have an answer to, you could maybe raise your hand, let me know that you have something different to say?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Well, that's what I want to hear. Because everyone will go, Well, that may not be It might be, no way, Colleen, you don't know what you're talking about. So until you tell me that, I don't have any way of knowing. I think every time the judge asks you guys a question, I saw or heard a lot of nods. And I think that's typical, you know, you want to be agreeable, kind of get on, maybe even get out of this process, right? So our common habit is just to agree to not make an issue out of it. But sometimes when push comes to shove and we actually talk to you one-on-one, we find out that that's not your opinion at all. And so that's important to tell me now. For example, we'll be talking a lot about reasonable doubt. And we might be kind of giving you some general ideas of what to expect. Well, I had once where someone said she didn't tell me this until later, she wanted irrefutable evidence. And I said, well, that's not what you're gonna hear that the law is. So are you gonna be able to follow the law? And it wasn't until way later that we came to this conclusion that maybe what she wanted and what was actually required were two different things. And she never told me when we were in here. So it's really important that if I tell you something or I talk to you about something you don't agree with, there's nothing wrong with not agreeing with me. Trust me, my family does it all the time. So you don't agree with me, I'm okay with that. Just please let me know. And then we can either work through it or we can decide whether or not you want to be kept, that kind of thing. Because that's exactly what's important. I mean, I don't want to treat you like going over and over and over the same thing, but that may be the only way I can do it if you don't participate with me. So the more we participate early on, the easier it'll be for us. I noticed that, as I indicated, there are some familiar faces. Has anyone, Ms. Cruz, you've been in here before, but you didn't serve, is that correct? Okay, anyone else that's been here? You look familiar, I thought you had been. You also, okay, well, we have a group of people that have been here before. Ms. Queen, what was your experience with being here before? Was it okay? Is that right?
No, I was excused.
I think in that trial, it's supposed to take maybe a couple weeks. And in this case, we expect maybe about 2 days. Do you think that would be okay since you already had to take off for today? It would just extend one more day.
I could see what I could do, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I do appreciate the work you do. But how about you, Ms. Cruz? You indicated that you have a little bit of trouble sitting. It'll be a little shorter this time. Do you think that you may be able to get coverage for 2 days?
If I have to, I would.
Okay. But you prefer not to?
I prefer not to,
Okay.
that way, yeah.
Right, and I appreciate that. So that might be a good example of, she could just nod with me, and in the background, she's thinking, oh.
Can I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
I know I was here before, but I just wanna let you know, I speak and understand English, but because English is my third language.
Okay.
And some deeper words I might not understand, so sometimes I might have to ask you,
Ask a
to
question.
rephrase it, or, what do you
Right.
really mean? So,
Well, that's
I don't know
a
if that
good
would be
question
an
that
issue
all
or
of
not.
you should be aware of, because I appreciate that point that you brought out. I don't think I use any big words as an attorney. I mean, I do know people that do. I don't personally feel like I do, but that doesn't mean that I don't, right? So if I say something that you don't understand, maybe I didn't even understand what I was talking about. I don't know. Because it happens, you get nervous and you're asking questions and then someone will say, I didn't understand your question. And I might be over here thinking, I didn't get it either. So that's an important part of this, to be able to say, I don't understand what you're saying. And it doesn't necessarily mean just the vocabulary that we use. Sometimes people get nervous that they use a big long run-on sentence that doesn't make sense, or a legal word that nobody but some lawyer understands. For example, I took my child when he was little to the doctor, and he said, oh, he's got the sinusitis, something or other, and I'm like, okay, what is that? And he said, it's not. Okay, I could get that word, so but I didn't understand what the heck the rest of it is. I didn't even understand why he was telling me that word, because I didn't think anyone understood that word. So if that happens and I use one of those words and you're like, really? Please don't hesitate to raise your hand and say, we don't understand what you're talking about. But I appreciate you letting me know that. If you think do you think it'll in any way take away from what you do understand? Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. Does anyone else have any concerns just getting started? Okay, great, thank you very much, I appreciate that. I will ask some questions. I hope that they're not personal in nature, but sometimes we do ask those questions, particularly about sensitive issues. And we may have some of those in this case, because the allegations are that the two people involved, the defendant and the victim, were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time. And that the female victim was actually under the age of 18. Does that cause anyone any concern? What about the defendant's age, that he was just a young adult? Does anyone think that should impact whether or not he should be found guilty in the adult court system? I'm gonna go back to my sheet. I'm not the best with names for people. Ms. Wyatt, how about yourself? Do you think you'll have any trouble determining guilt of innocence for a person that's in there, just a young adult at the time of the alleged crime?
No.
And what if you're similar in age? Do you think that should have an impact on whether or not someone's charged with a crime? And then do you think it'll have any impact on how you hear the case? Did you say, were you familiar with either the defendant or the alleged victim in this case? And do you think that you'll be able to sit here for a couple of days and make decisions based on what you do here?
Yeah.
Do you have any concerns getting started about whether or not you should sit on the second case?
No, not really. The only thing I could think of was, I work third shifts at Maynard, so the sleeping schedule could be a little off.
Okay.
I'll be here yawning a little bit. It's not too bad.
Did you have to work last night?
Yeah.
Oh, that could be bad. Do you think you'll have trouble? I mean, I've had it in court where I think people have dozed off. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I think I've even dozed off before when things have been going on way too long. I mean, we're just human beings, and we all have certain things, bringing up two little ones and then going to court some days was a challenge, just the same as what you're talking about. But that doesn't make it hard. You had to work all night last night,
I left a little early to go shower, so it's.
and then get here on time.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate your service here, because that's a challenge. Do you think that you would have trouble we have to work tonight too?
No, it's actually, yeah.
Okay, so you'll get one evening to rest. But for today's purpose, do you think that you'll have trouble paying attention or studying?
Sure.
All right, well, to begin again. Anyone else gonna have a problem like that? I can appreciate that could be a challenge, working all night.
I worked third, but they gave me the night off.
Oh, they gave you the night off? That was good, that's good, so you'll be okay today?
Yeah.
And were you on the jury panel before also? No?
I've been in here a couple of times, but got booted out.
Oh, okay. How was your experience with that?
Short.
Short? Okay.
I couldn't hear,
Oh, you,
first I had the hearing issues, so.
oh, how about now? Do you still have the, oh, you had surgery, didn't you?
Yeah.
How did that go? Everything okay?
Doing good.
Hearing going okay? Did you start your new job?
Yep.
Okay. And are you still, is it Louis Gino's that you're working?
General Mills.
General Mills, okay, I know it was one of the factories. Is that going okay for you?
Yeah.
And are you having any trouble hearing at this time?
No, not at all.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear everything was successful there. Anyone else have a hearing issue? Okay. Sounds good. I've had it where we've had to get hearing aids in the middle of batteries for hearing aids in the middle of trial. So don't hesitate to let us know if there are any issues. Mr. Brown?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, have you been into the courtroom before for jury selection or anything?
Yeah, it was excused last time.
Okay. Do you think you'll have any trouble serving for 2 or 3 days this time too, I hope?
No, ma'am.
Okay. What about the indictment? Do you think we'll have any issues with that type of
No, ma'am.
thing? Have you had any friends or family members that have been involved in domestic issues or criminal cases or anything along those lines?
No, ma'am.
And do you think you'll be able to be fair and partial to both sides?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm gonna just briefly talk about a few things. Oh, I should go back to that question that I asked him. I apologize. Has anyone else ever been in court for any type of domestic, criminal or contested issues that they could tell me about? Or how about friends or family? I know that could be. Yeah, I'm gonna look at your face like I didn't quite ask the right question.
His Honor served as magistrate every 10-month period during my divorce proceeding in
Okay.
2012. I don't know whether you needed to know that.
Oh, no, that's, I appreciate that. But was there any hostility or anger things that took place or, I mean, that's typical in a case like that, but nothing that went to the criminal system or anything like that.
No, it was difficult, and she filed a subsequent contempt motion. We had to resolve that too.
Oh,
We got through it. We're friends again.
okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much for telling me. That is important to know. Anyone else?
I am a school teacher and I had to go to Hocking County for one of my students about the abuse that his dad had done to him during his childhood and frequent scheduled visits.
So you testified in their juvenile court? Or?
Yes.
Okay. So it would have been like a dependency, neglect, abuse type of
Yes.
case? Okay. Do you think that would have any impact on how you hear a criminal case involving two people that were involved at one time?
No.
And from your statement, what age of children do you work with?
Middle school children.
And do they ever get in romantic situations? And at that, I mean, that's a little bit younger, but.
Oh, yes. And I think it gets younger and younger, unfortunately.
Not wrong with that one. Have you had any situations even at that age that might have risen to the level of what looks like it could end up being domestic violence long term?
No.
Okay. Has anyone worked in any type of shelters or with victims or with anything along those lines? And in that, working with the children, do you have to judge their credibility in it?
Well, I'm a special needs teacher, so I have to take into account their level of maturity versus their real age.
So in that set of circumstances, someone could be of a certain age, but their actions are younger.
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
And that could happen actually, have you seen that happen maybe in people that aren't necessarily disabled?
Correct.
Okay, so people sometimes don't always act the same despite what their age might be.
Yes.
And a lot of that might have to do with their background and things like that. Now, we're not gonna have the opportunity to have any background information on the people that we hear today to give explanations and explain why things might happen, other than what you might hear on the witness stand from them themselves. Will that cause you any problem?
No.
you think that that might be something that you would kind of wonder or think about while you're looking at the evidence?
No, not at all.
What about in your typical life? Would you kind of wonder why people are doing what they're doing?
Not really.
Okay.
Nothing surprises me anymore.
Well, that's true. But being surprised and still wondering why they did that, would you agree that sometimes we wonder why they do, and there's not always an explanation?
Right.
Now, one of the things that the state doesn't have to prove is typically is a motive. Like, why did somebody do what they did? Because we can't necessarily get into their mindset. Is that okay with you that we don't, that might be something that you question, but that you're not gonna have an answer?
Right.
So the mere fact that you might wonder why that happened, or why someone would do something, or maybe even what their background was, that's a question that's left remaining. But would that be something that you would consider a reasonable doubt when looking at whether the state has proved its evidence? And why would that be something that you wouldn't think about?
Because you have to go by the facts that were presented.
And if that's not something the state has to prove, then even though there might be doubt to it, that's not one of the issues that the state had to prove. Would you agree with that?
Correct.
Is it Mr. Deck? So we may hear some testimony from younger people. In that case, would you want to know, will you be wondering about what their background information is, or why they would do this, or, kind of think maybe I'll treat them differently than what you might an older person? Okay, you'll be able to look at just the evidence that you hear and see whether it has state proved it. One of the things that I think that's important, among others, that the judge mentioned is the issue of we're just here to determine the guilt or innocence in this particular case. And typically, what we want to know is what happens at the end. So in this type of case, you're not going to hear about sentencing. You're not going to be asked to make those decisions. You don't get to that point. I think typically in our regular life, if we have to make a decision on something, we want to know how that's going to impact someone, and that sometimes factors in how we'll decide things. In these cases, though, that's not really an issue. You don't get to make those, to hear that or make that decision. You get to the first part. Did he or she commit the crime? And did the state prove that beyond a reasonable doubt? Ms. Davis, these type of cases, I feel like in our regular life, we want to know what happens. If you're watching a TV show, you follow it all the way through and find out what happens to the people. You can stick around for that at some point later if there is an issue regarding that, maybe not, but it's not something you're going to be able to determine or consider in this case. Will you be okay with that? That you'll only be hearing whether or not the state proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone have an issue with that they want to know what's going to happen before they decide? I don't know what's wrong with my throat today, but I'm struggling here a little bit, so I apologize for that. Mr. Lewis, I haven't asked you any questions. Have you ever had to sit on a jury at all? And did you know any of the parties that were mentioned? Okay. And the information that I provided about what the general allegations are, did they have caused you any concern? Do you have any children of your own?
Yes.
Okay. Boys, girls?
Two daughters.
And have they ever been in a situation with a boyfriend or something that you didn't approve of?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay, good. Are they younger then?
One's 18 in college at Shawnee in Portsmouth, and then the other's junior this year, Jackson, she's 16.
Okay, 16 and 18. All right, so everything's been good so far?
So far.
All right. Have you had to evaluate or consider disputes between the two of them?
That's more my wife.
Okay. All right, well, being that it's your wife, and I'm asking you to do this here, do you think you'll be able to do that? I mean, if you'll be evaluating testimony and see whether or not the state has met its burden in proving the facts of the case. So that'll be okay with you? All right, great, thank you. You'll be hearing testimony from a lot of different people and people that you don't know and haven't ever met. And so I always think that's an important thing to bring up. How do you think you'll be able to evaluate people that are on testifying as to whether or not they're telling the truth or not?
I should be fine with it.
Okay. What are some of the things that you'll be looking at?
Can't really think of anything right
Okay,
off.
okay. Does it fit in with the rest of the facts?
Yeah.
Is there evidence to support that? Do you think that people always behave in a way that you would anticipate? Like, do your children ever surprise you with what they do?
Knowing them and what they've done in the past.
Okay, right. So you know that, so that's what you expect.
Right.
But do you think that everyone's gonna act just like them?
No.
Okay. And will you listen to the evidence to see if the way that they reacted goes along with the rest of the evidence? Yeah. And sometimes, because they have different backgrounds and things like that, they may behave in a way that doesn't fit with the facts. Do you agree with that? Or what our expectations would typically be? So does everyone believe that teenagers should be held accountable? Even if they're 18, 19, 20? Okay. And the judge mentioned our names of witnesses. And we do have a trooper. I think we've all had the occasion to get a speeding ticket or have friends that got speeding tickets or that type of thing. And honestly, I've gotten a speeding ticket. I probably couldn't pick the person out who gave it to me or remember him. But I always think, because you don't get to see him at this point, there's a possibility that the trooper who comes in today will be the same person that maybe gave one of you a speeding ticket. Does anyone have had any bad experiences with something that, like a ticket, that if they saw the trooper and said, "Oh yeah, I remember you," that would impact how you would hear the case today? Okay. All right, great, thank you. Has anyone here been a victim or had a friend who was a victim of domestic violence? And how about has anyone been charged with crimes against the family, boyfriend or girlfriend? And that could be anything, trespass, menacing, burglary, domestic violence, assault, anything like that. Does anyone here know each other?
Space.
Okay. Yes.
Faces.
Okay. Does anyone see anyone here that they think they would either think, "Oh my gosh, if you decide, I have to follow whatever, I respect you enough that I will follow what you decide"? How about the opposite? Like, please do not put me in a room with him or her. All right. Has anyone had any contact with law enforcement, either good or bad? Okay.
I worked asset protection for many years, loss prevention at Walmart.
Okay.
So I worked with all the officers such as Kite, both Sheriff's Department and Jackson City Police.
Okay. So you worked with Officer Kate,
Yes, ma'am.
and that was in a professional capacity?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that will have any impact on how you hear his testimony?
No, ma'am.
I grew up in Northeast Ohio. My dad was the fire chief for 25 years in my hometown, so I got to be friends with the police chief and some of the police officers up there.
Okay. So that would have been more in that area
Yes.
than around here. How about through teaching? Do they have a school resource officer or anything like that?
Yes, they do.
And you didn't hear his name
No,
or her name, I should say.
correct.
And then, Mr. Reed, I think you indicated that you had some contact with law enforcement.
Yeah,
Okay. Do you think that that will impact how you hear the testimony today?
yeah, I'm good.
One of the things that we'll be talking about a little bit, or you'll hear, what happens at the end, the judge will give you what's called jury instructions. And he'll explain all of the laws to you and how you're supposed to evaluate the law. So if there's any question between what either myself or defense counsel say, go back and rely on the law. But one of the things that we talk about and what you hear a lot about is reasonable doubt. Can you give me what a definition of what reasonable doubt is, just off the top of your head? No.
Well,
You think?
reasonable doubt if facts aren't lining up the way they're being presented, but to me, they're not lining up the way I think they should, or somebody says something that, in their testimony that doesn't quite add up to me, or I don't know.
Okay, so that might present enough of a doubt with you that, hey, this doesn't quite make sense, I don't really believe what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, if you had an experience like that where things didn't quite add up, what would you do?
Question it a little more.
Okay,
Yeah.
question it, maybe go back and look at the evidence and see if
Yeah.
there's someone else that could explain it better, or that type of thing.
Yeah.
Can you think of an important decision that you've made in your life? Like a big one, like job-wise, marriage-wise,
Yeah.
divorce-wise, whatever.
Yeah.
Did you go through a lot of questioning to get to the end of that?
Yeah.
Okay. Were you left at the end, did you still have some, what I would call concerns, or
Yes.
maybe am I making the right decision kind of situation?
Yeah, I think anybody would.
Right, so in pretty much everything we have, there's always gonna be the
Little bit.
potential for some doubt.
Yeah.
It may be not rational, I mean, sometimes it's based on fear, like, how is this gonna impact it? Or sometimes it's just things that are not in your control. But we all kind of go back and we question, are we doing the right thing, is this enough? And that's when we look at, here, it's not beyond every possible conceivable doubt. We joke as attorneys, like an alien could have landed and done this. Yes, that's true. That's not a reasonable doubt. So not to make light of that, but you can always find something to explain something different, So there's always the potential for some doubt, it might be small. If you had any doubt left, what are some of the steps you would take to see?
Go over the testimony again, and the explanations, and try to come to a conclusion, but I may not. It might just
Right.
not for me. So.
Right, and there is always a possibility that your doubt is reasonable and that there was enough. That
Yeah,
you
try to
could-
get the doubt small enough that can be, set
Right.
aside or whatever.
Another thing that I like to ask about is, what if it's a question you have, but it doesn't relate to what the state has to prove?
And it would not,
Right, so that could be a doubt that we would have, like, why would they do that, or what's their background, or that type of thing. So you might have enough evidence to say that, hey, we could tell this happened, I don't know why this person's behaving like this. You might go back and say, is that something the state has to prove? So when we have doubts, we wanna look at whether or not it's something the state had to prove. So if not, maybe we can put it out of our mind and say, let's not, or were there enough other things? Like, that person's not really making any sense, but everything else shows me that we can just disregard that. And the court's gonna tell you that you can consider part or all of someone's testimony when you are looking at it. So if you believe some of it or you believe all of it, it's not an all or nothing thing. I think we've worked with people enough or talked to people that says, yeah, I agree with you on these issues, but these, like, I think there's a reason why you're telling me that. So that would be a set of circumstances where you might have some doubt, but there's enough to overcome it.
Yeah, it's gotta come together as a whole, so.
So you could see a situation that there wouldn't be an opportunity, we wouldn't be here if there was like everyone agreed, right? Right, so, that right there, the simple fact that maybe we're not all in agreement, is that alone enough to equal reasonable doubt?
No, I know.
Right, you gotta go back and look and see how everything fits in. How about you, Mr. Valentine, what do you think about this issue of there not being a circumstances where you could prove beyond all doubt, irrefutable, impossible, like everything is definite, proven?
I think you have to look at all the evidence that's presented. Does it tie it together, or is there big gaps that would lead you to question, was something else in play that wasn't discovered or presented?
Okay. Good points. How about you, Ms. Cruz? When you look at, what do you think of when you think of having to prove something and having maybe some doubts left?
Well, just look at more of the facts and like somebody said earlier, listen more, look at the testimony and study it, kind of, you know what I mean?
Right, go over it, talk about it.
Yeah, talk about it, discuss, and maybe it would help come together.
So do you think you could talk to everyone about it and maybe see if they saw something that you missed, that kind of thing?
Yes.
We're gonna be playing a number of videos. Does anyone think that they'll have any trouble hearing or seeing or anything along those lines before we get started? Does anyone have an issue when I say that there's really nothing that we can prove beyond beyond all possible doubt? That when we make important decisions, we're still gonna maybe have some questions at the end. And we need to go to the next step, and if we do have questions, determine whether or not they are something the state needed to prove, whether they've been answered through other witnesses, whether you're not comfortable with part of it, but there's enough to overcome it. Ms. Wyatt, do you think you'll be able to do that?
Yeah.
Ms. Davis, how would you assess someone's credibility as somebody that you don't know?
I don't know if this is typical, but I have read a lot about body language and that sort of thing. I think you can, not always, but especially if you don't have a personal relationship with someone, but I think there's ways to check and see if someone's telling the truth. And obviously you're gonna weigh that against facts in the case and the other evidence being presented.
Do you think that if someone's in a stressful situation, that they might show some body language that's maybe different?
Yes, absolutely.
And it might even make it more difficult for them to testify too, that they have to be in here and relating difficult things that they've had experience.
Yeah.
And would you agree that each person's background and things that they've had experience in their regular life will make them react differently?
Yes.
One of the things that I was kind of surprised with as a young attorney, when they would evaluate people that testified, they would say, well, they didn't behave like I would, or I've been in similar circumstances and I didn't do that, so this must not be true. I think everyone behaves differently depending on their background and what they've been through and what they've experienced. So what one person might experience is not necessarily what I would experience, and I might not behave in that manner. But that doesn't mean that we can just discount it. We have to look at whether or not, considering everything that they've said, what they've looked at, what they've been through, and how they present it, along with all the other facts, is that the way that they would behave in that set of circumstance. So Mr. Mannion, you and I probably come from different backgrounds, and what something would be might be normal to you, might not be normal to me, and we might react to those things under different circumstances. Would you agree with that?
100%.
And, maybe you think, oh, I would have never done that. And I won't even disagree with you with that, like, what was that person thinking? But that doesn't mean that there weren't facts and circumstances that would lead them, that doesn't necessarily make it true, that just because they reacted different. Does anyone think that they'll have trouble assessing credibility of any of the witnesses? And does anyone have any religious beliefs that would prevent them from sitting here or making decisions? Is there anything else that I brought up that anyone needs to tell me about? Okay. All right, so everyone thinks it'll be okay to sit and be fair and impartial to both sides. And we talked a lot about, and maybe you've read in your books, that the defendant has a right to a fair trial. But the state also has a right to a fair trial. And that's just every bit as important. Does anyone have an issue with that? I think that we should just say that it's the defendant that only has a right to a fair trial. Okay, so we want you to listen to all the evidence from the beginning to the end and wait until you make a decision until we get to the end. Is everyone okay with that? All right, well, thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate it. I don't have any further questions.
Mr. Bolcher for the defense.
Good morning again. I tend to be a bit soft-spoken at the start of things. I tend to get louder as things go on. Can you hear me? Yes. Can anybody else have a problem right now? Mr. Death, do you? Great. How many of you are familiar with the Sunoco station that's located at the end of Main Street here in Jackson? Okay. Anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about? Mr. Matchett?
This filling station,
It's a Sunoco? Yeah, I think it's called the filling station.
Main and Chillicothe, Main and Bridge.
Main Bridge, that's it. Okay. Anybody ever worked there? Mr. Valentine, if I understand correctly, at some point years ago, you had a gun pointed at you.
Yes, sir.
Was it on the sidewalk
It was
in the city?
in Cincinnati.
And was anybody with you?
Yeah, a friend was.
Okay, so there were two of you.
Yes, sir.
You were both the subject of a robbery.
Yes, sir.
How did it end?
I mean, I had only a few dollars in my wallet, so I handed it over. It wasn't, something to, fight about or try to do anything about it. I just kind of went with what happened.
And did it ever result in a criminal prosecution?
Not that I'm aware of.
You reported it though?
Yes, sir.
And you probably still remember how you felt?
It was 20 plus years ago. Not really. I mean, I was in the military for 20 years, so I had a lot of experiences with that were probably not traumatic, but, adrenaline, things like that, they were pretty, from being in the service for that many years.
Okay, so you yourself are quite familiar with firearms?
Yes, sir.
How many of you own firearms or have access to them? Ms. Wyatt, I take it not. Now, in this particular case, as the assistant prosecutor has indicated, a jury which often has as its core task of assessing credibility, trying to figure out who's given the straight of it. We may not be facing that kind of prospect. Both of the individuals in this case, Mr. Maynard and his girlfriend Nicole, were given videotaped interrogation after the fact. And what they related was pretty much self-consistent and consistent with the other person's version. So there may not be major discrepancies in the facts that are related here that occur primarily on the parking lot at that Sunoco station, which have security cameras. So it may be that your primary task in this case is trying to figure out how the behaviors fit into the framework of our criminal code in Ohio. Now, if that was your assignment, basically, that turned out to be what you're really up to as a jury. Mr. Lewis, what do you think would be important for you in trying to make that determination? Where does this fit? You'd want to know what the law was, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Okay, and neither the assistant prosecutor nor I are the source of the law. The judge is. He gives you an instruction, and you understand how important it is for you to understand exactly what the law is before you can try to channel the behaviors into some category. You have daughters, is that correct? And it sounds as though they have not had any real difficulties in their relationships with the other gender, so to speak. Has anybody had an experience where there was some trouble at some point in time? How many of you have raised teenage daughters? Property? Or is she still at home?
She's actually, it's my stepdaughter and she's 25 now.
Okay.
But I do remember what it was like raising her.
There tends to be certain volatility associated with the progress through puberty and the young adulthood.
Yes.
Anybody have an experience with raising a teen? And I don't mean to be gender biased in this situation, but I raised a couple of daughters myself. Ms. Queen, did you?
Yeah, 2 daughters.
3?
2.
2. Okay. You deal with behaviorally challenged individuals?
Yeah.
What are the age ranges?
One is, he is 22, but he is profound, very profound. And so more like 5 or 6. And he's nonverbal and very high behavior.
When you say high behavior, he can be violent?
He can be quite physical. He's little, but he could be a handful, especially with any change to his routine. I've been with him for about 5 years now, and we have a very strict routine, and he does not like to deviate.
Is he the only individual that you interact with?
No, I have an older one who's 46. He's suffers from autism, but he's pretty high functioning. His is just behaviors too as well. He can become quite verbally and a time or two physically aggressive.
And Mr. Rafferty, you deal with developmentally challenged individuals?
Yes. I have some autistic students, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, and spina bifida students.
So they have physical and psychological
Yes.
difficulties. What is the age range for you?
6th grade through 8th grade.
And you deal with them within the framework of a public school system?
Correct, at the Vinton County Middle School.
Ms. Davis, you have daughters?
I have a teenage son and an 11-year-old daughter. Yeah.
So you've got the boys. What are their ages?
They're 16.
Okay.
Yes.
And are they allowed to date at this point?
16 was their age they could start dating, but no girlfriends as of yet.
That's the chance to come. And Mr. Mann, have you had any experience of raising teenagers?
Yeah, in an 8-year period, I went through 54 foster kids from 10 to 17 years old.
And you saw almost by definition, these children come from troubled backgrounds.
Yes, most of them was, probably 80% of them was gang members from Franklin County.
Well, really?
I was sort of one of their last chance.
Had they already been through the juvenile court system then?
They were one of
Some of them had probably engaged in violent behaviors, injured other people.
yes.
And you were able to deal with those kids in that situation?
I picked kids up straight from the big blunt crack houses. I picked them up with gunshot wounds in their head straight from the hospital.
Really?
Yeah, been there, done that.
You bring a basic experience that I think is unique.
And I've got two boys, one's 16 and one is 19 that has Asperger's syndrome.
High functioning.
Yeah.
Has particular aptitudes that are unique.
Yes, his is, for sure.
Ms. Wyatt, you happen to be in the age range of the two people involved in the situation. I think you will find that Nicole Hinkle was approaching her 18th birthday in August of 2020. This happens at the end of July 2020. Tyler Maynard, he had just reached his 20th birthday in July that year, so you're right there. Do you, in your own peer group, have you seen what you could determine to be a toxic relationship that exists between a boy and a girl?
Yeah.
Have you ever witnessed what you consider to be bad behavior resulting from this kind of a situation where people maybe they're attracted to each other, but they're no good for each other?
Yeah.
Have you ever tried to intervene?
I mean, as much as possible. I mean, you can't force someone to do anything, but you can try to help them as you can.
You're not a parent in that situation. You're trying to give them good advice. Now, as the prospective youngest person on the jury, you're going to be, if you go back into that room, you're going to be dealing with people that are a result of your own parents. You haven't done this before, and as far as I know, nobody on this panel right now has ever actually gone back into a jury room and deliberated a case. Am I right about that? So everybody is starting from the same point. Never done it before, we're going to try to get it right. Suppose as the deliberations continue, you find that you're in a minority position, that most of your fellow jurors do not agree with you. Some do, but most don't. How do you think you would react as time goes on and people begin to say the same things over and over again, and you're still holding on to your position because you think you're right? What happens as people's, maybe their temper begins to flare a little bit? Sometimes voices raise in a jury deliberation. You can't hear what they're saying, but you can hear them.
I mean, I would do my best to stay calm. I've worked with the public for a few years now, so there's been a lot of people who drive me, like at Walmart, if I don't know where something is. Like,
And you're working the night shift.
I am now, but I was on the second shift before.
Okay. And if am I mistaken in thinking you would ordinarily be asleep right now?
I would.
And how do you feel? I mean, just physically, how do you feel?
Very sleepy.
Okay. One thing that's important, it isn't always the case, but one thing that's supposed to be important is for jurors to be alert and attentive to what's going on. And even if you're fully awake, sometimes it's hard because things. Do you think you can handle this today?
I can try my best if I need to. I mean, I'm definitely a little cloudy, but not too bad.
And you're not expected to work the third shift tonight, are you? You come back here in the morning.
No, I get 3 days off a week. So I work 4 10-hour shifts, and then, so I just started my 3 days off today.
Mr. Brown, you've had close connections with law enforcement officers back in the room where you bring people who've been shoplifting. You know this particular officer in front of us now.
That's correct.
Now, as I suggested, it's not likely that we're going to get into a situation where a law enforcement officer's testimony is at issue, and some other person not in uniform has contradicted them under oath. But if that situation did develop, would you be inclined to accept the testimony of the uniformed officer as opposed to a person not in uniform, maybe even a defendant in the case?
I'm probably the more partial to the uniformed officer.
And if it's somebody that you know and have a baseline with, would that make a difference?
No, sir.
Now, if the judge instructed you that you gauge the credibility of all witnesses by the same standard, would you be able to do it?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Deck, you own a firearm?
I do not.
You do not. I've asked Ms. Wyatt about her experiences with friends that have gotten involved with each other, but they're really no good for each other. Have you had any kind of equivalent experience?
To a certain extent, yes.
Have you ever tried to intervene?
Not really intervene, just more or less try to talk to them, discuss, tell them reasons why I think they shouldn't be, just certain stuff like that.
Have you been effective?
Sometimes.
What do you do for a living?
I work construction.
Are you missing wage income right now by being here?
Yes,
The case has been scheduled for 3 days, might go 3 days, might be done with their wages tomorrow perhaps, but what does that do to you if you have to stay here?
I mean, I missed my wages for those 3 days. It puts hurting on me, but if I have to, I have to.
Okay, so you're willing to do it? Sort of. Ms. Cruz, it sounds as though there is a childcare situation for you. Who fills in? Is it just your husband and he
My
can't go out
husband,
there?
yes, me and my husband work together at the shop, and he does a lot of the businesses in residential here and outside Jackson as well. And so, actually, like right now, he was supposed to go to Waverly for a business call there. But, so he's got the baby right now, so he's just gonna take the baby with him at the shop and not go to the
Baby in
call.
the car seat, go to Waverly?
No, just stay at the shop and maybe he could figure out do remotely or, I don't know.
Well, I know
But I'm willing if I have to.
from my own experience when computer problems arise in an office, people get desperate pretty quickly.
Especially if it's a business that's
Yeah.
down.
Right, and they want you there as fast as they can get you. So you're gonna lose customers potentially in this situation. Nobody can come in as a babysitter.
My mom and them, they all work.
Okay. So you're sort of stuck at this point, and so is your husband. Mr. Reed, is there anything that's come up that we talked about, Assistant Prosecutor included me, that you think should be a concern to us? And, gauging whether you can be a fair and impartial juror. And if there would be a conflict between a law enforcement officer's testimony and another person who's not in uniform, they both put their hands up and said they'd tell the truth under oath. Do you think you would be more inclined to believe the law enforcement officer? Taking it from your head nod, that you approach it as though both were on an equal footing.
Correct.
Now, Mr. Matchett, do you work as a consultant at this point?
I'm just working on a hourly basis for the construction company from which I retired March 31st.
If I recall your questionnaire, you work in the nuclear industry.
I did at one
Yeah.
time.
The A plant over in Piketon?
That is correct.
And what kind of work did you do?
15 years was the public affairs manager, primary spokesperson at newspaper, and then the last 7 years down there, senior auditor in the nuclear safety and quality organization.
Sound like responsible positions, you probably have security clearances.
I do hold a U.S. Department of Energy Q clearance.
You know, to give you a little bits and pieces of what the case is about. You know, we're dealing with a 19-year-old, just turned 20, a 17-year-old ready to turn 18. I've indicated the primary incident supposed to take place at the Sunoco station, and that there is some video footage from security cameras, no audio. So part of what you may find in front of you is trying to analyze from behavior that you can see, what's going on in somebody's mind at the time. Have you ever had that responsibility in the course of your employment where you were involved in some security situation?
No, my job is always based on objective, verifiable evidence.
Data.
Yes.
Have you ever owned a firearm
Yes.
currently?
Yes.
No. Have you ever had anyone, as Mr. Valentine has, point a firearm at you?
No.
There are a couple names, they're not prospective witnesses, but they're in the background of this particular case, and I'll ask you, a Danielle Christian. She would live just south of Oak Hill. I think she's actually over the border in Lawrence. Anybody know? Tim Christian, that would be your husband. Do any of you still use a road map? When you go from here to there, you don't have a good idea what the route is. Somebody's smiling back there, Mr. Reed. Hey, don't be ashamed.
A lot of people probably don't even know what that word is nowadays.
I know. You can't even find them at the filling station. So you all use GPSs when you want to get a route.
Still use a map depending on where I go to Wyoming, normally every year to hunt, and a lot of the fire roads and stuff like that don't show up on a GPS, so you rely on a map.
Yeah, you need a detailed map at that point, maybe with lines of elevation on the topographic.
Yes, sir.
To be safe.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you're all familiar with GPS. What kind of apps do you use for this particular purpose? Is it Google Maps or what?
Yes.
Pretty much a popular one. Andy, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I like road maps, just don't use them anymore.
No. Okay. Now, you've heard the assistant prosecutor talk about what you think beyond a reasonable doubt ought to be. But in fact, we have a statutory definition, and that's what you're going to hear from the court. And I think when he relates it to you, he's going to use a couple of different approaches to what beyond a reasonable doubt means. I think you're going to hear the phrase or clause, evidence of a character that you would be willing to act and rely upon it in your own most important affairs. Think you'd have any difficulty with that, if that's what you hear? Does it make sense to you?
Yes.
Ms. Rafferty? Ms. David? Mannion? It seems pretty straightforward, but it also puts it into your mind and your unique experiences. What are my own most important affairs? When have I made a decision? What kind of evidence did I have in front of me when I made it? And oftentimes, we make decisions in our own most important affairs impulsively. The car purchase, the engagement. We don't often run a column with the pros and cons, but can you see that that standard of proof is going to mean something to each one of you and maybe not the same thing to each one of you? But when you put your hand up as a juror and you take an oath, which you may shortly be doing, you're swearing that you will apply the law of Ohio, including that core concept, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, as well as you can. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel, if you'd like to approach. Mr. Reed, we're going to thank you for coming in, but we're going to excuse you. If you need anything for work, we have that up at the front office. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
At this time, we would ask Lindsay to go over the skin.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Were you able to hear all my questions? Any answers you need to give? Were you able to hear the state's questions? Are there any answers you need to give concerning those questions? All right, and for the defense, any response to those questions? So you believe you could be a fair and impartial juror for us?
I think so.
And you could serve today and maybe through Wednesday? Right, you heard the names of the witnesses?
I didn't have any of them.
Okay. So you're coming here as sort of a blank slate. You don't know anyone, you don't know anything about the case.
Right.
All right. For the state, any inquiry?
Thank you. Morning. Have you ever had to sit on jury before?
Mhm.
Okay. Have you had to make important decisions in your life? Were you able to do that?
Yeah.
Were you the type that makes one more spontaneously or goes through everything and sees how it fits together?
I see how it fits together.
Do you think you'll be able to do that in this set of circumstances?
I think so.
I do notice on your form that you indicate that you had a close friend or relative that's been a victim of crime and specifically domestic violence. How close of a person were they to you?
It's my best friend.
Best friend. And did you witness what took place or did she just relate to it?
I've witnessed like after the fact, like what was done to her and her house. That I didn't see what actually happened.
Okay, so you saw the after effects of
Yeah.
what happened. And then I'm sure you talked to her about it.
Yeah.
Okay, did she have to go to court or anything for it?
I think the charges were dropped or something. I don't think she actually had to go to court for it.
Did she want to pursue them or did she decide that she didn't want to go forward?
She decided she didn't want to go forward.
are there circumstances where you could see that the state might take over a case and decide that things need to go forward? Are you okay with the fact that the state would take on a case and want to go forward? Do you have any issue with the state being involved in domestic type of situations like that? And do you think you could be fair and impartial to both sides in this case?
I think so.
Did she stay with the person that had?
Unfortunately.
Yeah, so you could see circumstances where people would do that anyways. Whether you think it's a good or bad choice, that is what happens, right? Okay, so you would agree that people act differently depending on what they're faced with, and maybe what you or somebody else would choose to do.
Absolutely.
And you could look at just specifically how this person is behaving, but also relate it to with the facts that you actually do see. And maybe those two don't always correspond with each other. You might have facts on one thing and then they say something that's contrary. Are there reasons for why they might do that, do you think?
They might not remember it as it was presented or whatever.
Memory might be an issue, and how they feel about someone, you think that might play into it as well.
I think so.
And do you think to be able to evaluate, we anticipate having some video. Do you think video always captures every single thing that goes on when you have a camera out somewhere?
I don't think so.
So there might be circumstances that occur outside of the purview or outside of the view finder of the camera itself. And those things need to have some information filled in. Would you agree with that? Okay. And do you think you'll be able to be fair and impartial in this particular case?
I think so.
Okay. Do you have any concerns that we should bring up or with any of the things that you've heard so far? All right, thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you. For the defense?
What kind of work do you do at Adina?
Pretty boring. I just watch like the heart monitors for the inpatient side.
Is this something that you do at bedside or is this remote?
Remote.
So you're charged with responsibility for monitoring how many patients at one time?
Probably like 30 or 40. Degrees.
So you got screens all around you?
Yeah.
Are you there by yourself then in that room?
No, there could be up to 5 of us.
And it's your responsibility to alert the floor, so to speak, if there's a problem.
Yeah.
How long have you been doing that?
3 years.
Seems sort of like life control.
Yeah.
Is this person still your friend, the person that had this troubled relationship?
Yeah.
So you haven't severed ties?
No.
You've not been a juror before? You grew up in Chillicothe?
No, I just work in Chillicothe. I grew up in Jackson.
Went to school? Know anybody right here?
No.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Counsel, would you like to approach? All right, thank you. Mr. Brown, we're going to thank but excuse you. If you did anything for work, we have that up the front office. Appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
At this time, we would ask Jennifer Gill to seat 6.
Good morning, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Were you able to hear all my questions?
Yes.
Any answers you need to give me?
I mean, I know police officers, I'm a correctional nurse at Ross County. So I work with, law enforcement.
Do you know Officer Knight?
Not by looking at him,
Okay. Do you know Trooper, I believe, Dunn?
not by the name.
Does the fact that you have the association with law enforcement, you work with a lot of police officers, do you tend to side with law enforcement over non-law enforcement?
They have a very strong influence on my opinion, yes.
Okay. So does the defendant kind of is he starting behind the 8 ball with you, so to speak?
I wouldn't say so much.
Maybe a little? Okay. So, given that he's maybe a little behind in the count, so to speak, with you, you think you can be a fair and impartial juror in this case? Okay. Turn over question to the state at this time.
I think Mr. Bolger indicated that for the most part, everything involving law enforcement is gonna have some type of videotape. Do you think that you'll be able to be fair and impartial then to both sides? And do you have any friends or family that have been victims of domestic violence? And did they react in the manner what you expected them to react? And do you think that you'll be able to be fair, having had that background with your friend or family, do you think you'll be able to be fair and impartial to look at all the evidence and view it only in what we have here in court? And I know that working as a correctional nurse, we'd be able to serve 2 days of today, and hopefully tomorrow we'll be through 3 at the max.
I will not be getting reimbursed for my time.
And so that'll cause a struggle for you, is that right? Do you work for the state or do you have another agency that you
I'm
work?
contracted in through Ross County.
And,
And Jackson.
I'm sorry.
Ross County and
Ross-
Jackson.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. I'm sorry, I had forgotten that. Will that be weighing very heavily on your mind when you're having to listen to the evidence?
Right, and I'm a single parent, so.
I have no further questions at this time.
For the defense?
So I correct in understanding that you do nursing contract work here in Jackson County.
On occasion, yeah. I more fill in there more recently.
Jackson County Jail.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when you look across the room at Tyler Maynard, does he look familiar to you?
He does look familiar, but I've not worked at the jail for a few months, so.
Then
I haven't had
a
to-
year, would you have encountered him sometime in the year?
I don't think so.
I know that the kind of work you do has some, like an emergency room, it has some element of physical risk associated with it.
Right?
Have you ever been the victim of any assaultive behaviors by an inmate?
I've had numerous threats.
Threats?
That's pretty common, actually.
Okay, have you ever had to testify in a disciplinary hearing regarding reported threats?
I mean, not in like court, I've had to go up and give my report for like the administration's office and stuff
Like
like
rules
that.
and infractions?
Mhm.
And you depend on the corrections officers in some situations for your own physical safety.
Every day. Yes.
I have no further questions.
Right. Counselors like to approach? Ms. Gill?
Yeah.
Hill.
Maybe I mispronounced your name. The one we just got. Jurors.
Gotta make sure that I'm not this. All right, thank you. Ms. Gill, we're going to excuse you. Appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much. If you need anything for work, we have those excuses up the front office.
At this time, we would ask Douglas Jewell to sit.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Were you able to hear all my questions?
Yes.
Any answers you need to give?
No, but I requested I can talk to you
In chambers?
yes.
Okay.
At this time, we would ask Diana Pierpont to seat six.
Good morning. How are you?
Good.
Good. Were you able to hear all my questions? Any answers you need to give me? Okay, you're able to hear the state's questions? Any answers you need to give us on that? Okay, and the defense questions? Okay, any answers you need to give us? Okay. Now, how are you related to Tyler Pierpont? Okay. Now, I believe Tyler at one point worked for the prosecutor's office, but no longer does. Does the fact that your son worked for Mr. Lovett's office in any way make you feel that you couldn't be a fair and impartial juror in this case? Okay. And you heard me list the witnesses? Don't know any of them. So you're coming here again as sounds like a clean slate. You don't know any of the witnesses. You don't know anything about the case. Okay. For the state?
Ma'am, I think you got called for another jury. I did too, right? Then you had a problem that time as nurse of the school system, is that right? Well, that kind of cleared up with it being summer, or do you still have it? You're not. Okay, good. All right. You've heard a little bit about what this case will be about. We haven't gone into many of the details yet, but we're anticipating that the state will have the burden of proving kidnapping, abduction, and weapons charge. Do any of those cause you any concern? And will you be able to follow the law and see if the state has met its burden beyond a reasonable doubt? Do you think that what the judge tells you about the law might be different than what we would, after watching TV and reading books and things like that, might expect for what the law would be? Like what the definition would be? There might be a common term for what it is, and then there might be the actual elements that the state has to prove. Kidnapping, for example, you might have something in mind as to what it is. But it might be different than what the actual, the Ohio Revised Code says. So would you be able to look at, instead of what our just general everyday definition of kidnapping is, and look at whether or not the elements that the judge provides to you in his jury instructions are met? And the fact that it's a family member, domestic violence allegations, boyfriend, girlfriend, and those type of things cause you any concern or special issues? And when you work in a school, do you work with teenagers there as well?
What I'll be doing now, she's in first grade.
I'm sorry,
A first grader.
first grader.
Oh, one, she's going in some, okay.
And have you worked with any type of organizations that work with domestic violence victims or offenders? All right. Well, thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Good morning. How long have you worked with the Jackson school system?
This will be my fourth year.
Fourth year. And it is the nurse's office.
It's actually just a one-on-one aid. A one-on-one aid.
One-on-one aid. Are you dealing with children who have particular challenges, one-on-one?
She's on the diabetic pump, so she has to be monitored every day.
So if you have a student that you assist on a daily basis in school, and you've been doing it, is it the same student for the entire period?
2 years ago, I did it through, I was a preschool. She was in preschool with us
I think so you followed her.
2 years ago. And then I had, last year, I was a nurse's aide in the high school and the middle school. And then now this year, back to her. So I did deal with teenage kids last year and middle school kids last year.
Okay, so you have had experience with the teenage population
Right.
in the school district. Is that Jackson City or Jackson County?
Jackson City Schools.
You know a little bit about cases you might consider as a juror. Is there anything that in the back of your mind is troublesome to you? You look across the room, you see Tyler and Maynard, you haven't yet had a chance to view Nicole Hinkle. Have you formed a first impression?
Regular teenager.
You've raised children through their teenage years. You have a son.
Son. That's the only one.
And he used to work in the same office that.
Yes. About 4 years, but I don't think she was there when he was there.
Did you ever talk to him about his work?
Sure.
Did he describe to you the difficulties and the anomalies that he encountered in prosecuting cases?
His job was collecting back taxes, so
Oh,
I think
a
he
little bit different.
He came in court a couple of times, but his job was that.
And if I understand it correctly, at this point, you're ready to go. You don't see any reason why you couldn't be fair and impartial.
Good to go.
Thank you.
All right, counsel, would you like to approach? All right, thank you. Ms. Coco, we're going to thank you for coming in, but we're going to excuse you. If you need anything for work, we have that up at the front office. Again, thank you for coming in.
This time we would ask Jamie Spurlock, seat 10.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Have you been able to hear all my questions? Any answers you need to give me? Be able to hear all of the state's questions? Any answers you need to give us?
No.
And for the defense, you heard all of their questions. Any answers you need to give us?
No.
So you can be a fair and impartial juror. Okay. You don't know any of the witnesses. So again, you seems like you're a blank slate. You don't know anything about the case, and you can be fair and impartial. Okay. For the state, any questions?
It looks like you were a teacher at Oakville.
Yes.
You didn't know the defendant from there.
No.
What grades did you work with?
Kindergarten through fifth grade.
So elementary school. Did they have disputes amongst each other?
Disputes.
Yeah, like disagreements,
Just little squabbles.
just squabbles around the school play. Were there any that kind of took it to the next level that you had to deal with?
No.
Okay, that's good. Do you feel that you would be able to sit and listen to all the testimony, videotapes, and interviews to make a decision based on all of the evidence that will be presented?
Yes.
Okay. We talked a little bit about with some of the other jurors about the issue of reasonable doubt, and that there's not a circumstance that you could prove something 100% beyond each and every possible and positive doubt. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that? I'm sorry?
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, all right. First thing that you'll get to hear what the judge will give you the definitions, we'll rely on those. The first thing that I think is important out of that definition is the issue of reasonable doubt. I believe that was described sometimes as, when we make an important decision, whether we would rely on it or not, the most important of our decisions. So even with those, there can be some doubt, but it's whether or not it's reasonable or just a question that we're not able to answer, and those might be completely two different things. We'll see with that as well. How would you describe yourself as what adjective would you use to describe yourself?
I would say that I was fair. I would say that I would be calm in situations.
When asked which side you describe yourself as fair, which side in this case would you be fair to? Both, okay, all right, thank you. And the state accepts the burden of proof as well as the issue of all the other issues that the court will talk about. Do you think that there's anything in this case that would cause you any concern that you feel that you would not be a person to serve on this type of jury?
I can't think of any.
Okay, all right, well, thank you very much.
Morning.
Morning.
What grade levels did you teach at in your
The elementary, from first to fifth grade.
first to sixth,
Fifth grade.
fifth grade? And when did you retire?
2005.
Do you still have any affiliation with the schools? After
No, I
retirement?
didn't go back and substitute any.
You didn't do that? You know that community pretty well.
Yeah.
I mentioned the name of a person who lives in that community. It's not Tyler Maynard, he's no road, so. But a Danielle Christian and a Tim Christian, do those names ring a bell to you at all?
No.
Because you've been retired now for 15 years, 16.
Yeah.
Old new generation that's coming through the school system. You know a little bit about what we're going to be dealing with in this case. Is there anything that gives you pause, that makes you think with some reluctance, maybe this isn't for me, I don't know that I want to do this?
Not really. I think I can be impartial.
Are you familiar with that Sunoco station that I made mention of? Do you use a GPS to find your way around now?
No, not really.
Still have road maps?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
All right. Council like to approach? That would be the defense's last channel until we get to the alternate. All right. Ms. Pierpont, we're going to thank you for coming in, but we're going to excuse you. If you need anything for work, we have that up at the front office.
At this time, we would ask for Jones to seat 6.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Were able to hear all my questions? Any answers you need to give me? Able to hear the state's questions? Any answers you need to give us? And were you able to hear the defense questions? Any answers you need to give us? Okay. So you heard the names of the witnesses. Do you know any of those people? Okay. So again, it sounds like you don't know anything about the case, you don't know any of the witnesses, and you can be fair and impartial. All right. For the state, any questions?
Morning. Gonna ask just a few questions, and was there anything about this case that you thought you might feel uncomfortable with, or anything along those lines?
Yeah.
Have you had any contact with law enforcement?
No.
And traffic or otherwise, have you been charged with any crimes?
A long time ago.
And do you know if you dealt with a trooper on that occasion?
No, I believe the sheriff's department.
And, not to get too personal, but what was the charge that you were looking at?
That I was under a suspended license.
Are you familiar with either, Officer Kite or Trooper Dunn?
No.
Your contact with law enforcement, will it have any impact on how you, hear the testimony? And would you remember who you had contact with if you saw them?
It's been so long ago.
Okay, long time ago. Have you or a friend or a family member been either a victim or charged with or accused of any type of domestic violence situation? And do you do any work with either the prisons, any other type of work that domestic violence shelters, anything along those lines? Do you think you'll be able to assess credibility of witnesses? And how would you go about doing that with them being, how do you think you would go about doing that with them being people you don't know?
I assess the situation.
What do you think you would look at to see?
I just look for credibility in their statements.
And will that just be consistency with the other evidence and what the other witnesses say, or what types of things would you be looking at?
Credibility.
All right. Is there anything else that, of all the questions that were asked, that you think were important for me to know about?
I can't think of
All right, thank you.
For the defense.
Mr. Jones, have you raised children?
I have to. That hasn't grown.
Gone from the house? Here in Jackson.
One's in Jackson and one is in Columbus.
And are you presently employed?
I'm retired.
What kind of work did you do?
I worked for American Electric Power 20 years.
In transmission?
It was distribution.
Distribution?
Yeah.
I use those words like I know what I'm talking about, but I don't really. What's the difference between transmission and distribution?
So transmission is, you're working up to about 1 million volts. And distribution usually goes up to about 48,000.
So So when there's a power outage, you're out the door. Doesn't matter what the weather is.
You're exactly.
Pole,
Poles underground.
insulators. You've never done this before?
Yeah, they're over here.
How do you feel about it?
Yeah, it's first time I really got experience.
You know anybody up here?
I know one person,
Who's that?
Mr. Patchett.
Do you see that relationship, whatever it might be, as having any effect on your ability to be fair and impartial, make up your own mind? A further question, thank you.
All right. Counsel, you'd like to approach? Let's call the first alternate.
At this time, we would ask Kristen Roach to seat 13.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good. We able to hear all the questions that have been asked today?
Yes.
Any answers you need to give us?
I've worked in the fire station.
Okay.
Definitely.
When did you last work there?
2019?
So when I listed the witnesses, did you know any of them? Okay. Because I believe some of those witnesses may be people who worked at the filling station at the time of this incident. So it doesn't sound like you worked with any of those people. Okay. Anything about having worked at the filling station make you think that you couldn't be a fair and impartial juror in this case? Okay. So you don't know any of the witnesses, and you really don't know anything about the case. Okay. Now, you'd be serving as an alternate juror. Okay. You serve in the bullpen. If something would happen to one of these, 12 jurors, when we get to deliberations, then you step in. So it's important that you be as attentive and listening to everything as carefully as any of the 12, because we don't know. We've had cases where I've had to ask the alternate during deliberations, step in. So you think you could do that for us? For the state, any questions?
Will you be okay if you hear all the witness testimony, sit through everything, and you just have to go home? Be okay? And will you still be able to pay attention just in case you might have to serve?
Yes.
Have you had a friend or family member or known anyone that's either been a victim or charged with or accused of some type of domestic violence situation? Do you have any strong feelings about firearm laws? Will you be able to follow what the law is on that situation? And do you think you have any difficulty serving for 2 or 3 days? No. All right, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mrs. Roach, you have a 14-year-old daughter?
Yes.
She goes to school locally?
Yes.
And you are related to an attorney here in Jackson County?
Yes, she's
Briefly,
what is it?
still talk briefly? Do you have a close relationship with her?
Yeah.
Does she ever talk about her activities in court?
Yeah.
You know, a little bit about our subject matter. Have you ever observed a young couple in what's a poisonous or toxic relationship with their relationship? They might be okay people, but they're no good for each other. Have you ever tried to intervene in a situation like that?
Yeah, my voice, my opinion. And you're gonna do what you're gonna do.
My first impression of you is that you don't have any trouble voicing your opinion. And I've asked Maya how she would react if she was on the jury, the door closed, and people began to discuss the case, and she found eventually she would not share any opinion of most of her fellow jurors. How do you think you would react in that situation? You're in a minority.
Oh.
You want to go home. You've had enough of this. It's the third day.
Are you referring to the mirror? I'm sorry, were you talking to the mirror?
I was talking about you.
Oh.
to her.
I was confused also because I thought you were.
Sorry. Now do you understand? How would you react? How would you react in that situation where you were a minority back in that jury room? You were ready to quit and get home.
Nothing you gotta do, I mean, I don't know how to word it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you've never done it before. And you
Right.
You think you'd be able to stick to your guns?
Oh, yeah.
No further questions, Karen?
Counsel, if you'd like to approach? Folks, we've kept you in these seats for a little over 2 hours. So if anyone, this is probably a good time. We've got one juror who's a prospective juror who's taking a quick break. Why don't we take a 15-minute restroom break? We have restrooms up on this floor. So I'm sorry about that. All right. We are about to call our second alternate, I believe.
Jeffrey Simmons, if you just want to move to the bench in front of you, I'm not saying.
We have a chair over here.
Oh, do you? Okay, we have the chair up here.
I need to say something before you start with this.
Okay, let me just get him seated and then
I
we'll,
just want to let you know.
okay. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my daughter started band camp today. She goes from 9 to 3:30, but then she goes again from 6 to 9.
Okay.
So I may be able to schedule someone to pick her up for 3:30. But I'm not sure because I've been taking, this morning she went to work with me and then I took her and dropped her before I came here.
Okay.
So, and my mom would do it, but I need to see if she can because I have an autistic sister who is still at home and she's 54.
Okay.
So she's kind of set, and if she doesn't feel like doing something, then it's kind of hard to get her in the car to take her to go somewhere.
Mhm.
But I just wanted you to know that.
Okay, but we would, I believe, would go until about 4 o'clock today.
Okay.
So,
She can sit for a half hour
okay,
if need be.
all right. That won't cause you undue concern. There'll be someone at the band camp.
Yeah,
to-
I'm sure the band director will still be there.
Okay,
I mean, there's 4 of them, plus you have the other auxiliary leaders and stuff, but.
and where is the band camp
High
located?
school.
Here in
It's up
town?
on the hill, yeah,
Okay, so you're probably about 5-10 minutes to get there.
right,
Okay.
if that.
Um,
But I wanted to.
I appreciate that. You know, someone from the band camp could certainly bring her down to the courthouse.
I think she would be okay there.
Okay,
Because it's up on the hill and it's not like down around people, and I don't think she would have a problem staying
Okay.
there. Because, you know, she took plenty of liquids with her today, so.
all right,
But I think she would be okay until I got there.
all right. Does either the state or the defense wish to follow up on that disclosure? Okay. All right, and then we have our second alternate, Mr. Simmons. Hello, sir.
Hi.
How are you?
Just fine, thank you.
You know, you'd be our second alternate. You know, you're in the bullpen, so to speak. But it's just as important that, you know, you are attentive and listen to everything because you don't know. You could get called up. And you think you could do that for us.
Yeah, not a problem.
And you heard me mention the names of the witnesses. Do you know any of those people? Right. And do you know anything about this case?
No.
Any reason that you feel you can be a fair and impartial juror?
Yes.
Any reason that you believe that you couldn't be?
No.
Okay. For the state?
Will you be okay if you're just if you're the alternate and you don't end up having to hear?
That's fine, yeah.
Will you be able to listen and pay attention regardless?
Yes.
Remember? Okay. And if you were picked to sit in as the jury pool after that, if something should occur, would you be able to communicate and talk with everyone in the jury to come up with a decision for all?
I believe so, yes.
Did you have any concerns about the type of case that we'll be handling?
No.
And did you know any of the parties that were involved?
No.
Will you be able to listen to the evidence, including the judge's instructions on what the law is?
Yes.
And could you keep an open mind on those instructions that maybe the instructions aren't what we would typically think of certain crimes that you have to determine whether or not they fit the elements rather than the title.
Yeah, like,
I'm nothing further than thank you.
All right, thank you. For the defense.
Mr. Simmons, have you raised children of your own?
yes.
Okay. How many?
Well, between stepchildren and my biological 9.
9. Are any of them still at home?
No.
You know a little bit about what we're dealing with in this case. Did anything ever happen that was really upsetting to you in the rearing of these 9 children, involving them and their choices?
Yeah, I had some instances where we had seeked counseling regarding it, and we took care of the situation.
And when you got up this morning, did you just have a feeling this was going to be your lucky day?
No, I try not to look that far ahead.
Counsel, if you'd like to approach. Looks like we have our jury. So for the folks sitting in the back, I appreciate you coming in, but you won't be selected for this trial. So, you know, perhaps parroting Mr. Bolger, it isn't your lucky day, although you may feel otherwise. So if you need anything for work, we have that up at the front office. I appreciate you coming in. Thank you very much. And folks, I really think you are the lucky ones, because I think jurors find this to be, and I think you will too, a very interesting experience. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you your oath as jurors, and then I'm going to give you your instructions governing you in for during the trial. And then after the case has been submitted, and I will give you your instructions for your deliberations, but that will be later. So everyone please raise their right hand. Do you all swear that you shall well and truly try and make true deliverance between the state of Ohio and Tyler Maynard? And do you swear or affirm that you will do this to the best of your skill and understanding without bias or prejudice? Thank you. Jury service may be strange to you, so short explanations in order. Those who participate in a trial must do so in accordance with established rules. This is true of the witnesses, of the lawyers, and of the judge. It is equally true of the jurors. The lawyers present the evidence according to the rules. The judge enforces the rules and determines what evidence may be admitted. The following orders are being provided to you in open court. You must follow these orders at all times. It is not the intention of the court to be difficult or demanding. The court and each juror must follow the law, and the court must do everything possible to have a fair trial. Jury service is one of the highest and most important civic duties. The court is certain you will take your responsibility seriously, and I thank you for your time and effort. It's important that you be fair and attentive throughout the trial. Do not discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else. Do not permit anyone to discuss it with you or in your presence. Do not form or express any opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. It may be difficult for you to understand why you may not discuss the case among yourselves until it is finally submitted to you. You will receive the opening statements, the evidence, the arguments of counsel, and the law from the court in that order. You should explain this rule prohibiting discussion of the case to your family and friends. When the trial is over, you will be released from this instruction. At that time, you may but are not required to discuss the case and your experience as a juror. The court instructs you not to converse with the attorneys, parties, or witnesses during the trial. Likewise, the participants of the trial must not converse with you. If anyone should attempt to discuss the case with you, report this incident to the court immediately. So folks, you know, small courtroom, small courthouse. During the breaks, you're going to see the attorneys, you'll see me, and, you might do, good morning. They'll suddenly look down. They're not being rude, but they're, so don't take offense, but they're trying to follow this instruction that they have no contact with you outside the courtroom. Do not investigate or attempt to obtain additional information about this case outside the courtroom. It is highly improper for any one of you to attempt to do so. Do not read any legal texts or law books or any book regarding any issue raised in this case. Do not perform any legal research. Do not perform any experiments about this case. Do not look up any legal issues, facts, or anything about this case in any book or on the internet. In short, do nothing to find out anything about any aspect of this case. Do not visit the scene or attempt to do any investigation on your own. We will give you all the information you need and all the law here in the courtroom. So, folks, we'll be taking a break before we get going. At that time, I'm going to have you put your cell phones in your car. Everyone's got smartphones. You got the world's library sitting right in the palm of your hand. Now, I've never had this in a trial, but courts have experienced where a juror has decided, let me just look something up. That's improper, because the only thing you get to consider is the evidence presented here in the courtroom. I haven't had this happen during trial, but during our last jury selection, in the middle of the jury selection, I had a prospective juror decide to look up stuff about the case. Now, we were able to cure that because it was still jury selection, but now you've been selected as jurors. So leave your phones in your car. If anyone needs to get a hold of you, they can call the court and we would get that message into you. You are instructed not to read, view, or listen to any report in the newspaper, radio, television, or on the internet on the subject of this trial. Do not permit anyone to read or comment upon any news story to you in your presence. Such reports may be incomplete and are sometimes inaccurate. You may only consider and decide this case upon the evidence received at trial. If you acquire any information from an outside source, you must report it to the court. Now, I don't expect any members of the press to be here during this case, but if they would happen to be here, you must not allow their presence to divert your attention from this case or interfere with your duties as jurors. Further, you are not allowed to talk to members of the media during this trial. Any violations of these orders may require a new trial, which is expensive for all concerned and could result in possible prosecution of individuals not following these orders. During the trial, you have a personal problem. You may explain the matter to the bailiff, who will inform me. The bailiff cannot discuss the facts of the case with you. I will summarize these instructions at each recess. If overlooked, however, they nevertheless apply to your conduct throughout the trial. These orders remain in full force at all times, day and night, until I specifically release you from these orders and you are no longer a juror in the case. We'll have you sit in the same chair every day. We're going to give you badges to wear. I would ask that you wear those while you're here. It clearly identifies you as a juror, so no one accidentally comes up and tells you anything about the case. During the breaks, do not come back into the courtroom until we bring you back in. During the breaks, I'll have you be in the jury room. I thank you for your service. And, let me just go over two other things. You are the sole judges of the facts and the credibility of the witnesses and the weight given to the testimony. Later, I will instruct you regarding the law, and you will apply the law to the facts. It is your sworn duty to accept the law as given to you by the court. And I'm going to give you a brief outline of our trial procedure. First will be the opening statements. This where counsel will outline what they expect the evidence will be. These opening statements are not evidence, but they are a preview of the claims of each party, designed to help you follow the evidence as it is presented. Then the state will present its evidence. The defendant may, but need not offer any evidence. If the defendant presents evidence, the state may present rebuttal evidence. The trial concludes with the arguments of counsel and the instructions of law by the court. Thereafter, you would then deliberate upon your verdict. So this is probably a good time to take the lunch break. I'm going to give you passes you can put in your car. You shouldn't get a ticket, but if you do, please bring it to me. And then we'll give you your badges for that you'll wear here as jurors. You'll be given notepads. You can take notes if you want to. You don't have to. I do not review your notes after the trial. They are simply torn out and shredded. Now, the fact that a juror takes notes doesn't mean that that juror's memory is any better or has any more weight than a juror who doesn't take notes. If you do take notes, don't let it be so distracting that you're not paying attention to what's being said by the witnesses. So the taking of notes is entirely up to you. You can do it or not do it. So is there anything else before we break from the state, from the defense? Okay. Folks, why don't we come back here at 1 o'clock and be in the jury room at that point. And when we come back, you'll hear the opening statements. Do any of you have any questions? Okay. See you at 1 o'clock. Thank you.